You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 229.
On today's show, we talk about the amazing food at Pompeii, the Kingdom of David being found again, and an amazing Iron Age female warrior.
Let's dig a little deeper into that ridiculous patriarchy and rip it down. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. How's it going?
Good. I feel like it's been a minute.
So we ran a rerun because life.
It was kind of a rerun. It was an episode I recorded with you for Archaeotech.
Oh, yeah. I guess it was a crossover.
Yeah, it was a kind of a crossover. Yeah.
And we got some good feedback from that episode. So if you guys like that tech episode, we've gone on and done the Archaeotech podcast a little bit, and we may do it some more because my co-host over there is back to Saudi Arabia in a week.
And I'm right here across the table from you, so it's easy for you to rope me into, guest co-hosting with you.
Right. So we may actually, like I said, if I don't have interviews, we often do interviews on that show. Mm-hmm. We may do some more tech news shows.
Yeah,
and focus them over there.
It is really fun to focus on the tech behind some of the news articles that we see coming out. So,
just keep in mind, on that particular show, the audience is designed to be, thought to be very different. Mm-hmm. Typically professionals in archaeology and people interested in those spaces. So we don't pull any punches on the jargon and things like that. So
true, but I feel like I'm not super technical anyway, so I make you explain things to me. So
yeah, that might be true.
Yeah.
And also, we missed last week because, again, just didn't have the time for it. There was a whole thing with buying a car, and it was like this whole thing that just went out the door, and it took several days, and we just lost the time.
Time just slipped away, and all of a sudden it was Saturday night, and it was like, I guess we're not doing this.
So much like us just losing time, we ended up having to eat out at different places, similar to the people of Pompeii when they needed fast food.
Sometimes you got to eat quick.
It was a bustling city.
It was a bustling city.
I always heard that Pompeii was more like a tourist town. There's obviously people that live there, but it was a multicultural tourist town. And one of the things before I even became an archaeologist, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, is I took this guided tour when I was in the Navy back in 1996. We stopped in Naples, and then a bunch of us took this guided tour. And the tour guide mentioned, of course, a bunch of Navy guys, he took us to one of the brothels. There are many. Mm-hmm. And because there were so many people on their way in and out of Pompeii, they had basically frescoes, pictures up on the wall of the positions that you wanted to do, because the language, people didn't speak the same language. Yeah,
there were lots of languages coming in.
You basically just pointed to a girl or a boy, and then you pointed to the image and you said, I want to do that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I guess it got the job done, right?
I guess so.
So that's part of the tour still to this day, I think. Yeah. When we went on the Pompeii tour, I don't know, what was that, 2015 or 16? I feel like we saw the same frescoes. So it's definitely part of their thing. And what they're trying to show is that it was not just a tourist town, but a truly multicultural port town, right? These ships would be stopping in, for resupply or whatever. And so it was a lot of sailors and a lot of people there that probably had money to spend too. Mm-hmm. Because, they were doing jobs, they were on ships. So just a guess. But I think that's why these things the fast food essentially popped up.
Yeah.
So
what's prompting all this is an article titled Pompeii is back in the news. Or I think
I put that down. Pompeii is back in the news.
But Pompeii had kitchen shrines, dozens of bakeries, and a pizza fresco. Yeah. And I don't know, is this the same pizza fresco that was discussed a while back, or a different pizza fresco?
It is the same one. So we'll talk about that as we go here. But yes, it is the same one. And there's some things that were wrong with that initial announcement. So anyway, it is a new excavation season in Pompeii, as you might imagine. The summer's starting to wrap up. So news is starting to break. And I know we've talked about this before, but nearly a third of Pompeii has never been excavated. Mm. So they're still going back there and excavating a season every year. And sometimes it's salvage excavation because there's looters that are trying to, sneak in there and get stuff out. But sometimes it's just regular pushing forward a science academic excavation, which is what it seems like this particular excavation was. So it's a research team that was led by Alessandro Russo, and he's working in an area that has been excavated before, but not since the 1800s. So, some odd years since it's been touched.
That's around when they first started excavating Pompeii.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I guess what happened is in the 1800s, the fronts of these houses were excavated, but they were unable to go further into the buildings, either unable or unwilling. That was a little unclear to me from the article. Right. Maybe it was too hard, too dangerous, too something back in the 1800s. But now, given the technology and the safety measures we have in place, probably they feel better about it. So they've been fully excavating these structures.
Could have been from a preservation standpoint too. They didn't have the technology to keep the buildings intact as they excavated.
Yeah. I mean, if they stopped themselves back then and it wasn't just like an artifact hunt, that's actually like really great. It means that the work that was done in the 1800s was probably fairly good to begin with, because it's kind of like, oh, never mind. Cut that out. Yeah. I don't know what I was going to say there. But it is kind of like those excavations. There's places that are untouched still because we just know we don't have the technology to properly preserve it. And it seems like that might be how they were looking at it in the 1800s.
One of the numbers that is striking from this article is, well, first off, the sheer size of Pompeii. Because it says in here, I mean, I saw this number and I thought, oh, this is entirety of Pompeii that's been excavated. Yeah. It says 32,000 square feet in size is the size of the site for the dig that they're currently on.
This is what they're currently reporting on.
All of Pompeii.
No.
That's just this site.
Not just this area.
Yeah. 32,000 square feet. That's massive.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's into the square miles that Pompeii is. Is in size, right?
It was a huge bustling port city. So it was a really big place.
Yep.
And in that 32,000 square feet, one of the things that they have recently discovered, and this is probably the most interesting thing, is a huge bakery. And it's a bakery that does not have a storefront. So they weren't selling bread out of this bakery, or at least they haven't found a storefront yet. And it's not in a traditional position that they would expect a storefront to be in if it is there. So it's so big that it's capable of producing 100 loaves a day. And they're thinking it was probably a wholesaler because that capacity combined with the lack of a storefront is like, well, what else were they doing? They were clearly baking bread here, but they were doing it to potentially supply the Pompeii fast food establishments that are known as Thermopolia. Am I saying that right? I might not be saying that right. Thermopolia.
Yeah.
And that name actually comes from archaeologists, and it's not the ancient name for them. That's just what we have started calling them as we find these things over the years.
Hot drink counter.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Thermopolia is Greek for hot drink counter.
And that makes sense. Thermo. Is like hot temperature.
Oh yeah, you know Greek now, don't you?
I mean, no. I mean, that's just like basic Greek and Latin, right? You can figure that. Like thermos. Keep things hot.
I'm making fun of you because you're doing Duolingo in anticipation of we're going to Greece at the end of September. So yeah.
Aftos kane toast.
Oh, good job.
He makes toast.
Anyway.
I can also say things about pink avocados in case you were wondering how Duolingo works.
I know. I don't know why they would teach you that. It's so weird. So anyway, that was hot drink counter. And essentially it means fast food stand of various things. And this is where the whole pizza thing comes in, by the way. So they found a fresco during their excavations showing what looked like a pizza. And I guess the internet exploded in late June about this. I think I personally missed that, but you said you caught it or read about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was, I thought we discussed it on here, but we may or may not have. But it was, they said it looks like a pizza just because it's a flat piece of what's more likely focaccia with some things on it. And some of those things people were saying, it kind of looks like tomatoes, mozzarella, but they didn't have those back then.
They didn't have any of that. So it definitely was not what we would traditionally call pizza.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't pizza-like or a precursor to pizza. Some sort of bread with stuff on it baked in an oven. I mean, who wouldn't do that?
Sounds amazing. It sounds like it was more like a focaccia with this fruit and other condiments on it. Could you imagine like a date and goat cheese focaccia? Like that sounds like life, right?
Listen to yourself. Like you're saying that, oh, this doesn't sound like traditional pizza because it doesn't have mozzarella and
sauce.
We literally had pizza last night that had none of that on it.
Yeah, it didn't, did it?
No, it had balsamic vinegar.
No, it had sauce on it, though.
Pesto. It wasn't mozzarella and red sauce, though.
Right. It really depends on your definition of pizza, but it does sound like you shouldn't consider what was on that fresco to be like a modern day, like Naples style pizza.
I'm
definitely
pretty
was
upset about this. You go to any hipster pizza place right now, like some modern pizza place with like one word in the title of the restaurant, one syllable, and you're
Pie. The name is Pie.
Right. You're hard pressed to find a red sauce.
Okay.
Red sauce and or mozzarella to begin with.
Controversial confession here. I prefer pizza that doesn't have red sauce on it.
Which is not pizza.
Fine. It's not pizza, but that's how I prefer it. I like a flatbread.
You prefer a conglomerated bread product.
And dates and goat cheese and maybe some balsamic vinegar and onions. That would be good too. Yeah. Roasted garlic. Yeah. See, I just don't. I'm all for this being focaccia rather than pizza. So yeah. Anyway.
Well, back to the excavation. Yeah, on this, they actually found a few skeletons, including 2 women and a child, that looked like they were trying to take cover from the eruption. Now, the major eruption that happened in 79 AD was not the only eruption. There was several eruptions that week. And people, I mean, by the time the big one hit, I doubt it was business as usual anywhere in Pompeii. People were evacuating. Yeah. People were trying to figure out what to do. You know, they were just trying to figure out what's going on.
They probably could not imagine it in any way that their city was going to be covered in ash.
Oh, no.
They probably thought they just hole up inside a building and then they'll dig themselves out like a blizzard, like you would if there was a blizzard. You know, you just sort of let it pass and then you move on. And so how could you know that by taking cover, you're actually gonna die there? It's again the tragedy of Pompeii. It always really strikes at the heart, you know.
Well, I imagine for most people, there's no rapid way to get out of that city either.
Right,
not like you can jump in the car and go.
Yeah,
you know, and even if you could, I mean, if people were evacuating, which I know a lot of people were likely leaving, especially tourists, why would they stay? And they were probably gone days ago.
Yeah,
when it first started going.
Yeah,
but yeah, it would have been chaos.
It would have been for sure. And so you kind of have to forgive the people that just sort of like hold up somewhere. Like they just had no idea. How could you have known that that's what was going to happen? So yeah.
Right. So the final thing we'll talk about here is of course ritual.
Wait, where's my coffee?
I know
it's 9:30 in the morning, so I'm gonna. I never brought your coffee over. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So, and we may have a new graphic coming out on our TeePublic store about ritual that Tristan is putting together.
Oh, so, nice. Yeah, we do talk about it a lot.
But anyway, they found what they're calling a kitchen shrine, which is a detailed fresco. And what does it have? Like 2 yellow serpents painted on the wall, or what they call good demons?
They're calling those good demons. I don't know where they're getting that from, but that's what they're calling them.
They might have some other evidence that they're not talking about here that leads to this kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was, I mean, in this time period, even like today, you can walk into a business and see I'm just going to call it a Jesus fish. I don't know what they actually call them, like the Christian fish.
Oh, yeah.
People call it a Jesus fish. You see that people advertise that on their businesses. So that's different than back then.
That's true. Yeah.
Somebody could have had a shrine to some sort of god or deity or just some sort of religious affirmation.
Showing their religious preferences or allegiance or whatever on the outside of their shop.
Literally trying to speak to the gods and say, favor my shop.
Yeah, maybe. You know? Yeah. They said in the article that the shrine in the kitchen allowed people to offer food on their altars potentially, so you could like buy food as an offering. You
know, that's a hell of a sales pitch right there. It's like, hey, you want to buy some of this food? You can just give it right back.
You can do it. You just offer it to the gods, and then maybe like your voyage will be. And
then they walk away and just put that food back on the shelf, and it's just like a cycle.
Oh my god, that would be like some genius.
That's what I'm saying.
Marketing. I'm definitely on board with that.
That's why God smited them with fire and brimstone.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, this article is from Insider, and it's clearly just a press release, right? Like they just are getting some information out about what they found. So this is not an academic article. These are just assumptions. It sounds like that people are drawing from what they found so far, but there's not full evidence or There's not any evidence specifically behind this yet. So yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to end this one now. I'm sure there'll be more stuff about Pompeii as the summer unfolds.
Right.
Because that's just how it goes.
Yeah. End of summer is the time to release all the things that you've done that are cool, right?
Exactly.
Which is how we get, pizza frescoes.
Right. This is where the press releases come out ahead of the papers.
Yeah. Papers, I wouldn't think till next year, probably, right?
Yeah, usually. Yeah. Or over the winter sometime.
Yep.
All right. Well, now we're going to go to a slightly different part of the world down in Israel. And we're going to talk about a guy's opinion where we're going to look at, a historical figure and whether this young upstart was a king or just a really popular shepherd. Back in a minute. Welcome back to episode 229 of the Archaeology Show.
Good job. You remembered what show you're on.
No, I was trying to do that whole pretentious Ohio State thing. I just got canceled by a whole bunch of people in the Midwest.
I don't know what you're talking about. I feel like I missed something.
I don't even really know sports.
Oh man, that's not the first time you've talked about that.
You know,
it really bothers you, doesn't it?
Do you see like bumper stickers out there where the is just like huge because if you don't say it, it's just not the same. And it's like people who in Nevada who have it's Nevada, it's not Nevada.
Yeah.
It's Nevada.
Nevadans get very uppity about the pronunciation of Nevada.
Who cares? Just be lucky people are visiting. All right. So speaking of visiting, somebody's visited the biblical kingdom of David yet again, or at least they think they have.
Or have they?
Yeah. It sounds like lots of people may have and just didn't realize it.
Or have they?
So it turns out that a number of times people have thought they've found the historic biblical kingdom of David, King David.
Mm-hmm. And
we'll talk about him here in a second, but actually we'll talk about him right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know where my notes are. We actually took a little bit of a break so I could have another business meeting prior to this segment. So I'm a little out of sorts. Anyway, in the Hebrew Bible, for those that don't know, like myself, King David was the shepherd that slayed the giant Goliath. Everybody's heard of David and Goliath.
Yeah.
And I was this many years old when I realized that the King David that I've heard of before is the same David of David and Goliath.
It's so funny.
I didn't grow up religious.
Yeah. And I guess when you do grow up religious, that stuff is just like in your head and you just know it.
Yeah. I had no idea it was the same person. I mean, there's lots of same names in the Bible. It's a big book.
True.
You know?
I could see why you wouldn't think they'd be connected, but in this case they are. So, yeah.
David doesn't sound like an Israeli name. I'm probably going to get canceled for that one too. I'm not really sure where that's coming from.
I think it is. It's Hebrew.
Is it?
I think. Yeah, like the Star of David, all of that. You know.
Yeah, I hear you, but it's like a Americanization of the name?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Anyway, the fame of doing that, according to the Bible, eventually led him to become king of the tribe of Judah and later all the tribes of Israel. Right. Because Israel was still very tribal back then, of course, as lots of places were.
This is all from the Bible.
Yes.
This is where all this information is coming from. We don't know anything about the real David, if there was a real David.
We know very little.
Yeah. There's almost no evidence, archaeological or otherwise, to support him or his existence.
Yeah, and it's not just him or his existence. It's this entire kingdom.
Yeah,
Whether or not something like this actually existed, you'd think we'd have evidence of it. Now, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right?
Right.
Just because we haven't found it yet doesn't mean it wasn't a real thing.
Yeah.
But in such a heavily populated area right now,
and where a lot of archaeological work is being done, but there's still a chance that there's something that we haven't found yet. There always is.
Yeah,
always.
We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Professor Joseph Garfinkel, who's professor of prehistoric archaeology and archaeology of the biblical period at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, thinks otherwise. He's done somewhat of a study, and he published this in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology, which is a peer-reviewed journal, and is linked in the show notes. So there's actually two IFL Science articles. One is the one that we found, and they linked to another one from 2019 or something, where somebody also said they think they found the Kingdom of David, because this isn't the first time, or it won't be the last. And then also the original journal article that he published in is in the show notes. So if you want to go see all that, go check it out.
It kind of seems like anytime a large-ish compound of a sort is found in this area, it's like Kingdom of David.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now this guy thinks that he wasn't, like some historians think, that he wasn't just the ruler over a small tribe. He gained this fame from David and Goliath, which is apparently, they're not disputing that part. I don't know why. Yeah, they're just assuming David was a person and had some influence, but it was less than people think.
Okay.
He wasn't a king. He was a popular shepherd.
Okay. I mean, there's, he plays such a big role in the Bible. It makes sense that it was based on a real person at some point. There's some kind of truth to it.
Yeah, there's nuggets of truth, throughout any sort of document like that.
Yeah.
Even if it's been, blown up a little bit because of religious fervor and things like that.
Right.
So,
and because people are writing hundreds of years later, potentially.
Many hundreds.
So the word of mouth, it's like telephone, the game of telephone. It just gets bigger as time goes by. So all of that does make sense. Yeah.
Professor Garfinkel here says that he thinks a network of fortified cities around Jerusalem date to the early 10th century BCE, and that's undisputed, represent the kingdom of Judah built by David. And that's 200 years earlier than previously thought. The timing works out to match up with kind of the Bible.
Yeah.
And these fortified cities, which are all near each other, but they're not like, one big city. They're all near each other. But he thinks that represents, the kingdom.
The kingdom.
Yeah, because if it did, that would be pretty significant because, something like this probably didn't really exist in Jerusalem at the time unless somebody made the first big kingdom of Judah in the Jerusalem area, right?
Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, so we've got these different cities or villages or whatever they might be that are near each other that have been excavated independent of each other probably, and he's sort of linking them all together and saying this is the kingdom right here. Is that sort of what's happening?
Yeah, and what he's doing is he's saying the cities all date to a similar time frame. They all have a similar design, and that is mostly encompassed by the two parallel walls outside the inner portion of the cities, apparently. They are also linked by a series of roads.
Sure.
So they're connected, and that implies that the people were connected as part of a kingdom or at least a big group of people.
I mean, all of that sounds totally fair to me. The part where I drop off is like, but why is this the kingdom of David? Like, just because it happens to be at the same time as what the Bible said? I think so. The kingdom of David was. And it was likely the first big kingdom in this area. I mean, we're talking about the 10th century BC, 3,000 years ago. So it really was very tribal back then. And David, if I'm not mistaken, was like the first one to unite the tribes of Israel, right? Right. So, I mean, let's go Catholic Scroll Girl. Was that, I mean, I know just enough to be dangerous, right? Like I've got like this surface level knowledge that I remember from my religious catechism days or whatever, but like it's not good. Not reliable. Well, Garfinkel subscribes to the idea that David was the powerful ruler that is described and written in the Bible. He says that it's the minimalists out there that make David out to be a shepherd that ruled over a small village. And personally, I think the minimalists, as he calls it, are just people that are going off the current evidence that we have. They're not making an assumption because the Bible says it so. They're making an assumption based on the current archaeological evidence. Yes. And ethno-historical evidence, really. Right. I mean, there's a lot of written stuff around there. There's, a lot of history there. Yeah. He says also that he's not necessarily a maximalist, but that the kingdom, which would mean David was ruler over everybody, but that the kingdom David did rule over included Jerusalem, Hebron, and a few cities around them. He says that's the urban core of his kingdom. Again, I'm not like mad about any of this. Like it all does kind of make sense, except for the David piece. Yeah. It's like, why him? And you don't have any evidence of him specifically. You're just sort of circumstantially saying, well, these are all around the same time. Yeah. And also the Bible says there was a ruler around the same time who brought them together. So therefore David, kingdom of David, that's where it sort of falls apart for me a little bit, but. Yeah. And I mean, anytime we've found, evidence of a ruling class or anything in any part of the world, you often find stuff that is branded with the ruler, whether it's some sort of coinage or, frescoes and carvings on walls. And I mean, if we have evidence of these cities, I don't know what's left, but if we have any of these, then there would be something. You would think. To link them all together like that. Yeah, I mean, but again, absence doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that we haven't found it yet. So maybe it is there to be found. Yeah, but if we've excavated these like 5 cities. Yeah. I mean, come on. And also with archaeology, it's really, really hard to get super specific dates. So they're saying that these 5 places are overlapping, but like, what's the overlap? Are we talking 200 to 500 years? Because that's not one ruler, that's many rulers over that broad period of time. Now, if you have a 20-year overlap where they are all growing up and getting bigger at the same time, then that does represent one ruler. Yeah. So I would be interested to see how that evidence supports what he's saying as well. Yeah, he says specifically that he's not trying to prove the Bible real. That's like not his goal. Sure, he's not. But and historically accurate. Yeah. But his detractors say that's exactly what he's doing. He's starting from a premise of all this is real. Yeah. And I'm going to prove it real. I need to prove it, which is so dangerous in the world of science, right? Like you can't go into it like that. You can have a hypothesis. You should have a hypothesis, but you shouldn't be trying to prove it because then you're just skewing your own data, right? And you're trying to shoehorn data into this idea that you had rather than looking at what it actually is telling you. It's super dangerous. Yeah. The researchers think he's making too many generalizations. Other scholars in this area.
Yep.
Details don't line up. Probably exactly like I said about the whole dates of these different cities and stuff like that. Like it's got to be pretty exact to be one kingdom, right?
Well, and like you said, the whole game of telephone thing, when this was written down, he said they've, in the article here, they've likened it to like they call the fisherman's tale.
Yeah.
Your standard, every time you tell it, the fish gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. They say just like that, the kingdom of David was probably a small ruling area. That's likely true, but that it's just been blown out of proportion into this like huge thing.
Yeah.
So, and I would say if we're just talking about generalizations and what ifs here, if David really was an influential, powerful leader in his local area, there's nothing saying that maybe a couple of tribes or nearby tribes wouldn't have combined forces and come under one rule, right?
Sure,
I mean, that definitely happens all the time.
Yep.
So,
but the other thing you can't ignore is that if you've got 5 distinct cities that are separate from each other or villages, it's entirely possible that they built roads to connect each other, but they weren't united under one ruler. Maybe they had 5 separate rulers who just got along really well and created this interconnecting, thing, but they weren't necessarily under one ruler together. That definitely did happen. So,
I mean, it's not the first time or will be the last time that somebody says they found the kingdom of David.
Right,
but I will say, archaeologically speaking, the only way we're going to definitely be able to put a nail in this coffin, so to speak. Is that a little too? Anyway, I didn't do that on purpose. Anyway, the only way we're going to be able to put this thing to bed is if we find something that says David on it.
It's got to say David.
I mean, honestly, it does. With other archaeological sites, we don't have to see like a word like, made in Pompeii, right? But for this, we kind of do.
Yeah.
If you're saying it's a person,
you have to have the actual proof.
Yeah.
And like you said, there are plenty of other examples of cities from this area and elsewhere that have the name of the ruler or an image that represents that ruler. And that's the kind of thing we need. Until we get that, it's just like circumstantial, right? There's no scientific proof here. It's just conjecture until you have that.
Yeah. I guess I wrote in my notes here, I forgot, that other article refers to a 2018 dig, I guess.
Yeah.
When researchers found a large house outside of Jerusalem on the way to Gaza that dates to about the 10th century BCE. So again, one of the things I read, and I don't think I wrote it down here, was that people say that back in the 10th century BCE, Jerusalem was basically a small town. It wasn't a big city.
Right.
It was a small village with like outlying communities. So if anything had grown up to be this huge kingdom or this like massive influence, you'd know about it.
Yeah.
There would be evidence. There would be massive disruption. There would be a massive change in the archaeological record. I mean, it would have taken, decades for David to gain this influence, build up a kingdom, and then start building stuff, right?
Yeah.
That would have taken decades, but
for sure
there would be evidence of it now.
Yeah.
And I mean, these 5 cities are the evidence that this Professor Garfunkel says does exist. But again, unless it says David on the wall somewhere, David was here.
Right.
Then
like, how can you say
you can't conclusively prove it?
Right.
I'm not saying he's wrong either.
No, I wouldn't want to. Because, I think everybody believes that the Bible is somewhat based in something that happened in real life. There is there's nuggets of truth, like you said, in there. So there is something to be found, archaeologically speaking. It's just that, is it a whole network of villages, or is it just like one village where there was a guy who led it, who became the David of the Bible through word of mouth and the fish thing, like you said.
Exactly.
The fish gets bigger. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to have a bonus segment because I needed to learn something about David. And the bonus segment is going to be talking about what we know about David.
Okay.
So we're going to do that. But I'll just blow a little bit out of the water. Do we even know that he lived in the 10th century BCE?
Oh.
That's actually kind of a huge question. Is that extrapolated from the Bible and all the dates in there? Where do we get that?
Oh,
and
man.
Does that even put him in the right spot?
Biblical archaeology, it's like this rabbit hole that you can fall down into.
Yeah.
For sure.
So while we may not know much about David, we do know some things about a badass female warrior. Let's talk about her on the other side. Welcome back to episode 229 of The Archaeology Show. You have to say the. Otherwise you get canceled. All right,
canceling you.
Let's talk about we're going to talk about a badass female warrior because that's what somebody said in one of the things. But I'll tell you what, there's kind of a lot of these.
Yeah, it seems like it's coming up a lot lately, right?
It's kind of cool though, because all of our preconceived notions from the old patriarchy and archaeology is just like constantly being shattered.
It's getting broken down like everywhere we turn in different ways by different people. It's really cool. And it's partly because of technology, which is why this grave, this burial is coming up again. It's because we have more technology and we can do more testing on it, essentially.
Yeah, you got to take a look at the article too before we get started, if you can, because it's from the Washington Post, and they've just got a picture of a sword on there. And I'm telling you what, that is like a zombie killing sword right there. Yeah,
it's for real.
You know,
yeah.
We're finally watching The Walking Dead because I think we're the only ones that haven't.
I know, right? And, we're only 10 years behind. It's fine.
I know. But I'm saying this is a zombie killer.
Yeah, that's what I would use because I wouldn't want them to hear me. So, you know.
Yeah, you don't want to use bullets.
No,
for sure.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is a 2,000-year-old grave. And, let me just read the title here. It is 2,000-year-old grave probably belonged to a female warrior, study says.
Yes.
And so it's an Iron Age grave that was accidentally discovered by a farmer on a small island off the southwestern tip of England in 1999. So we've known about it for a while.
Yeah.
It was richly furnished. Like you said, there's a sword and there's also a mirror. That little round thing next to the sword in the image is a mirror. And you might be thinking that is a weird thing to find together, right? Sword and mirror, what?
I'm just like, really? Like badass female warrior and we got a sword and like a compact? Seriously.
I know. But like these are things that represented gender for this group probably, right?
Yeah.
And so or represented her, whoever she was.
Right.
But yeah, like a sword and a mirror found together, that is super weird because typically you would think swords with males and then mirrors with females. So there's definitely... that's already breaking the norm. So in 1999, when they found that, they knew that they had something strange going on, but they didn't know exactly what.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where that story mostly ended at that time. The island it was found on is called the Isle of Scilly or Silly, Scilly. We haven't
just
quite
want it to be silly.
Figured out how to pronounce that.
You just want it to be silly.
I do. I want it to be silly. Isle of Scilly. I'm going with it. So
it's in England.
It's in England. Yeah. And the reason the story kind of ended in 1999 when it was first found is because the preservation of the skeletal remains was pretty terrible. There's almost nothing left. They had a dark stain, which I know from my cemetery excavations that I've done over the years, that is pretty typical. Like sometimes you have nothing left at all. The preservation just isn't good for bones and you just don't have it. You just have like from the decomposition of the body, it darkens the soil and that's it, really.
Could that be like a really bad archaeological insult to tell somebody? It's like, you're just a dark stain on history.
I'm down for it.
Of course, that's not even an insult because eventually everybody's a dark stain.
Yeah, that's
somehow.
true. Yeah, there's really nothing to be like sad about there.
Right. All we are is one big skid mark on the earth.
Oh my God. It doesn't even last forever either. Like eventually that stain will be gone too. Yeah. So in addition to the dark stain, they found just 5.3 ounces or 150 grams of bone and teeth
That's not
fragments.
A lot.
Yeah, if you look in the article, you'll see like a pile of like just the saddest little pile of little fragments that you've ever seen. And that is all that remains of this person.
Yeah, that's not a lot, especially considering that bone is probably extremely dried out. So that's why there's more than it looks like this should be there. Like if this were actual like fresh bone, it would weigh a lot more.
It would. Yeah, it dries out. Yeah. And you're probably only getting like the ends of bones that are left because those like thicker pieces are the ones that last longer. You know, you're not getting any of the real fragile bits, but they do have teeth. And the one thing that teeth can do is tell you a little bit about the age. So they do know that the individual was between 20 and 25 years old when they died. But other than that, that's really all they can say. Teeth are not going to tell you if this is a man or a woman. They're not going to tell you anything else. All you can get from teeth is the age. And that's if you are lucky and have the right pieces. So they got lucky there.
So you did the research on this one. Do you know if they did any dietary studies with the teeth? Because you can often tell kind of where they came from based on what their teeth composition was made of.
Yeah, no, they did not talk about that at all in the article. So I don't know if that is something that has yet to be done or if they just don't have the right kind of preservation to do that kind of research. I'm not sure, but it would be interesting to know because like I said, in 1999, when this was found, they couldn't identify sex and they couldn't even get DNA out of these fragments. So they really knew nothing other than the fact that this person was between 20 and 25 years old. But they have reanalyzed recently as technology has moved forward. We have different options now. And one of that is to analyze the protein found in the dental enamel. And through that protein analysis, they can determine that the remains belong to a female. So that they take that and they combine that with the grave goods that they found. That would be the sword and the mirror and some of the other metal objects that were there. And they are coming to the conclusion that this was probably some kind of warrior leader type of person, but a woman. So that's really cool.
Cool.
Yep. And this was all published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports. And that link is in the show notes, and it is open access, I believe.
Yeah.
Even if it's not open access, you should be able to see the photos and the figures and stuff like that, which is always an interesting addition to the news reporting, which is the Washington Post article that we pulled this from. You can kind of really get the full story without reading the whole journal article if you have those two things.
Yeah.
So why were they able to determine sex from proteins? Basically, tooth enamel is super hard and durable, and that allowed them to pull the proteins out. And in this case, with the analysis techniques that they use, they were able to calculate a 96% probability that the remains are female.
That's cool.
That is pretty sure there.
This is the first, at least that I can remember, that I've heard of that you can actually sex based on proteins pulled out of tooth enamel.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can. And it has to do, I don't want to go into that science too much because they didn't cover it in this article and I did not research it separately, but it is the protein. Oh man. Yeah, I'm not going to try it. Basically there are techniques where you can pull proteins out and you can tell male or female based on that. So yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that kind of opens up a lot of stuff because teeth last for a long time in the archaeological record. And a lot of times it's the only thing left.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
I was just thinking we could probably go back pretty far into the past before things fossilized, So we probably can't get into like paleoanthropology far back, but well, maybe. I don't know. It just depends. It just depends on the preservation, right? But yeah, I feel like that kind of technique will really give us a lot of answers, at least as far as male or female. I mean, that doesn't always tell you a whole lot more, but it does give you some idea of what you're looking at. So this burial is quite rich in comparison to contemporary burials, which is why they are concluding that she was likely of some significance, right? Yeah. There's just a lot more burial goods. And Sarah Stark is the human skeletal biologist at Historic England and one of the study's authors. And she says that Iron Age Britain was a pretty tough place and that there was a lot of violence, warfare, and raiding. Yeah. Obviously, like you might imagine. And other burials from the area show that women definitely participated in the violence and warfare, but they weren't usually buried with grave goods of this caliber. So that's why this is just adding to this picture that women not only participated in the activities, but they might have been leading, commanding, had a more significant role than just either being the victims of this kind of violence and raiding but like actually doing it and participating in it. So,
well, like I said in the beginning, this is constantly adjusting our idea of gender roles and gender specific tasks and things that people did. It's not black and white.
No,
it's
it definitely isn't.
Just like it isn't today.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been for a long time. I mean, if you look in the historical record, what you're looking at is, a lot of times history that's written, painted, and discussed by men. And it's going to be biased and it's going to be looking at society in a certain way. Right. And in some cases through history, there have been pretty strict gender roles. But if you just look around, even England, which seems like a pretty strict one way or the other kind of place, has had queens and kings for the last several hundred years ruling over England.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Not just like all kings.
Yeah, I think that it's you can't understate how much of an influence the patriarchal nature of the roots and beginnings of archaeology, like how much that influenced how we interpret the sites that we found. Right. Like in the 17 and 1800s, it really was a male-dominated society. And because of that, the men primarily, that were doing the archaeology work really instilled their values, their patriarchal values on the finds that they were making, the things and the people and the places. So it's like you have to both break down that tradition from 100, 200 years ago and then also try to look at it without applying your own biases on it right now, too. Like we might want to apply a more gender equal image to it because that's where we are now. And so you have to be careful not to do that too. Like looking at this stuff objectively, I think is really, really difficult, but that's what it seems like they're trying to do with stuff like this. Like, yeah, it looked like it would have been a male because of the leadership nature of it, but actually this was a female, and the science shows that. So science and the I don't know, chemistry of it all, that is what talks here, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's about all we have time for this time. Well, we got more time, but that's all we have to say. So we do have a bonus segment for our members. If you're not a member, archpodnet.com/members, and you can join in with the conversation over on Slack that we have for all of our members. And more specifically, just in case you guys don't get our newsletter, which you can sign up for over at archpodnet.com. Actually, if you just scroll up a little bit, it'll have a little thing that shows up if you've never been there that says, hey, join our newsletter. It goes out every Friday, but one of the things we're promoting right now is our Culturo Share event that's coming up about underwater and maritime archaeology. And that's coming up on August 20th, 2023. If you can't make that, that's a Sunday, and it's at 10 a.m. One of the reasons for that is we have a pretty large UK audience, so we want them to be able to participate. And the person that's our MC for this is the host of the T-Break Time Travel podcast, Matilda Ziebrecht, and she is in Germany. Yeah. So that's why it's at 10 a.m. in the morning, Pacific time. So, varying times, but if you can't make that, it's a free event. Then if you are a member, you can see the video and watch the whole Q&A and the speakers and all that stuff anytime you want on your member pages over at archpodnet.com/members.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Membership is like $76 a year if you want a discount. If you don't, it's $7.99 a month. And it really helps us out and keeps these lights on. So, But anyway, thanks for that. Enjoy the bonus segment if you can get access to it. If you can't, please go try. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.archpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArchPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.